Matthias knew the meeting was wrong the moment Cassiel ignored the engine table. The new lattice diagrams had already been laid beneath glass, weighted at the corners with Zephyr's brass seals. 3 months of rebuilds, 2 sleepless weeks in the lower chambers, and 1 long night proving the archive bindings were clean enough to survive first commission. The guild clerks had been pushed into readiness before sunrise. The launch should have been procedural now. Final questions, minor objections. A signature? Perhaps 2. Instead, Cassiel was standing by the long windows, looking out over the canal roofs and pale towers of Aurelia, as if the city itself had called for his opinion.
"You've done good work here."
It was the kind of sentence that sounded generous until you noticed it had landed nowhere near the point. Matthias remained standing at the end of the table, one hand resting beside the brass seals. Cassiel turned at last and crossed to the table, but even then he did not look at the top diagrams. His fingers settled instead on the older schematics beneath them, the ones this rebuild had been meant to replace.
"The question," he said, "is whether Zephyr should still be in the business of building systems like these."
No one moved. Matthias looked at the diagrams between them. "You called for a launch review."
"I called for a decision."
"That is not the same thing." Cassiel gave a small, regretful smile, the kind that made other people feel unreasonable before they had even argued. He was always good at that. Helpful in tone, measured in posture, never forcing the room hard enough to leave fingerprints on it.
"It is," he said, "if the launch commits the guild to a direction it may not wish to keep."
There it was. Not a fault claim, not a compliance delay, not even an argument that the system itself was unsound. Something more difficult than all of those because it stepped above the work and made the work conditional. Matthias had spent weeks solving technical problems. Cassiel was now asking whether solving them had ever mattered. Matthias reached forward and flattened one palm over the corner of the top sheet. "If the direction was in question," he said, "that should have been raised before we rebuilt the spine." Cassiel did not look at his hand.
"Before now I wasn't certain the question was real."
"And now?" Matthias asked. Cassiel's eyes moved to him then, steady and almost warm.
"Now I think Zephyr is near the point where it has to decide what it actually is."
The words were calm enough to pass for wisdom. That was the danger. In another man's mouth they would have sounded theatrical. In Cassiel's they sounded like the natural shape of mature thought, the kind of sentence a careful person might admire for being larger than the room. Matthias heard it for what it was, a reframing broad enough to erase months of finished work without ever needing to say no. Matthias pulled out the nearest chair and sat, not because he wanted comfort, but because he suddenly understood they were no longer discussing timing. "What changed?" he asked.
"Pressure reveals structure," Cassiel said.
"That isn't an answer."
"It's the beginning of one."
"No," Matthias said. "It's a cloak." Cassiel took that without flinching.
"You think because the lattice is sound, the decision should be easy?"
"I think because the lattice is sound, you should have needed a better reason than philosophy." For the first time, Cassiel's expression tightened. Not much, a hairline shift at the mouth. Enough for Matthias to see the pleasantness was not strain-free.
"This is not philosophy," Cassiel said. "This guild has spent years improving instruments it no longer fully believes in. Better routing, better intake, better memory, better internal flow. Every revision assumes continuity. Every launch makes the assumption harder to escape."
Matthias felt the room narrow. That was closer. Still not honest, but closer. "So this isn't about readiness," he said. "It's about whether Zephyr intends to remain Zephyr." Cassiel said nothing. Silence from him was never empty. It always implied he preferred the other person to do the dangerous part aloud. Outside the windows, light moved across the canal water in pale strips. Somewhere below, a bell struck the quarter hour. Matthias looked down at the launch packets, at the careful order of a decision that had already been built, and now might be unbuilt by someone changing the category around it. "Lucien knows?" he asked. Cassiel did not answer immediately. There, at last, was the only thing in the room that felt honest. Not certainty, not objection, delay. It was very small. Anyone else might have missed it. Matthias had spent the last month tracing faults through Lattice and Archive, following minor distortions until they exposed the real weakness beneath them. He knew what a fault looked like when a system tried to hide it inside smooth behavior. Cassiel folded his hands behind his back.
Lucian knows there are questions, he said.
Questions?
The clerks can be stood down, Cassiel said.
It was such a small sentence. Matthias hated it more than he would have hated an accusation. Not because it was cruel, because it was tidy. Stand down, the clerks. Untie the packets. Fold the work back into abstraction. Let the labor become provisional by changing the level of conversation. Cassiel was still looking at him, as if the whole room had narrowed to whether Matthias would accept the shift politely. Matthias rested both hands on the glass over the diagrams. Under his palms lay the new spine, clean and stable, the work exactly where it had always been. Ready, useful, real. No, he said. Cassiel blinked once.
No, he repeated.
No more large language until someone says plainly what future you think this guild is choosing instead. The pleasantness did not leave Cassiel's face. It simply withdrew half a pace, like a host stepping aside from his own doorway.
Then I will say only what I know, he said. I am still looking into it.
Into what? Matthias asked. Cassiel let the question sit for a breath.
I intend to assemble a council, he said. Not a launch review, not yet. A proper discussion of the guild's path forward.
Matthias said nothing.
I will follow up when I have the findings, Cassiel said.
There it was again. Pleasant, measured, helpful on the surface. The language of process placed carefully over the fact that he had just stopped a ready launch without saying the word stopped. Cassiel gave the smallest inclination of his head, as if he had done everyone in the room the courtesy of restraint. Then he stepped back from the table, leaving the packets unopened beneath the morning light.